Good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending where you are in the world. My name is Mark Cumming. I'm the head of CoLov, and delighted to welcome you to this November First Weds, the second of a series of three built around the climate conference, the COP conference. And you're very welcome. CoLov is the association of people who have worked in international development and humanitarian work, and we're involved in supporting people at all stages of their work in international development, and especially when people come home and get them involved in connecting up the local and the global justice issues. These first weds, we hope, can connect people who maybe are working on development issues here in Ireland and connect them up to issues internationally, and also then help those who have worked around the world to bring that learning back home. So we're delighted to partner with the Department of International Development in Maynooth University, and delighted to have Dr. Eilish Dillon, who, along with her colleagues, plays the role of moderating these nights. Before I hand over to Eilish, just to say, do post your comments or questions in the comment box on the side there in the YouTube, and these will be fed to Eilish over the course of the evening. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're interested to find out more about CoLov, check out colov.org. And if you're interested to get involved, join and take part in our various membership activist groups. And finally, a moment at the end, if you are in Dublin this weekend, join us on Saturday at 11:45 at the Hugh Lane Gallery in town for the wider COP protest in Dublin. And of course, if you're not in Dublin and you're elsewhere, check out what's going on. And finally, very finally, to thank Concern Worldwide for their support for the first weds. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Eilish and our wonderful panelists for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Mark. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here this evening, and a pleasure to be able to focus again on the COP26 and on I suppose what's happening currently in Glasgow, but this time doing it a little bit differently. So we're going to look at where the wisdom lies and talk to an elder on the climate crisis. So we're going to take a step back from the endless empty promises of what governments say they'll do by 2050 or 2070. And we're going to listen instead to someone who's been on a journey of living more sustainably all her life, coming as she does from the Cowichan First Nation, and as she is spiritual advisor with the Saukey Nation, a small community of around 230 people living on Vancouver Island in Canada's British Columbia, where they are a solar-powered community. They're self-governing. The Saukey Nation began its journey to become more sustainable, a more sustainable solar community back in 2008, with a comprehensive community planning process that involved everyone, including children. And the guiding principle for the planning was based on the 7th generation, planning 100 years ahead. Saukey realized that in order to achieve sustainability, they needed to embrace traditional values, including deep respect for Mother Earth. And as its chief, Gordon Plains, has said, First Nations have lived for thousands of years on this continent without fossil fuels. It is appropriate that First Nations lead the way out of dependency and addiction to fossil fuels, and to rely on the power of the elements, the sun, the wind, and the sea once again. And so this evening, it's my pleasure and privilege to talk with Shirley Alphonse, who's an elder with the Saukey Nation and an environmental advisor to the Climate Action Youth Group with VIDEA, an education and activist group based in British Columbia in Canada. And we're going to address different aspects of the climate crisis, their effects, but also what kind of a shift is needed in response. And basically, where does the wisdom for all of this lie? So you're really welcome, Shirley, and thanks very much for taking the time to share your experience with us this evening. And before we chat chat with Shirley. Shirley would like to start our conversation this evening with a prayer. So over to you, Shirley. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much. So I'll begin my prayer, and this, I write all of my prayers, so it's all out of a book. Creator, Great Spirit, thank you for this day as we gather here in the circle. Members of the Climate Action Group in Dublin, Ireland, and our Climate Action Youth here in Canada, to share words to help us do all we can to start the world in motion, correcting the path to renew, to replenish, to refresh our beautiful Mother Earth, who has sustained us these past centuries. May we walk with kind, gentle steps every day, being mindful of Mother Earth, respecting Mother Earth, and being thankful and grateful for all she holds for us. Her beauty and nature of mountains, forests, rivers, streams, oceans. Home for the four-leggeds, the water dwellers, and the sky creatures, who we share the lands, the waters, and the sky with. Creator, Great Spirit, help us and guide us each day to look after Mother Earth and one another in a good way, for the sake of our children now and those yet to come to the 7th generation. That's my prayer.
That's lovely, Shirley. Thank you very much. And we'll come back to some of those very, very positive, kind of very mindful and gentle thoughts later on as well. I wanted to start this evening for us and this morning for you, just to kind of ask you a little bit about what it means to be an elder with the Saúke Nation. We hear a lot about elders these days, and in Ireland, our former president, Mary Robinson, is the current chief of what they call the Global Elders, who are an independent group of global leaders working for peace, justice, and human rights. But I'm just wondering, what does it mean to be an elder in the Saúke Nation?
Well, for me, it's passing on the teachings of our ancestors and just being there for the people. So an elder is one who shares teachings.
And could you tell us what kinds of teachings, or what?
Well, the teachings of being mindful always, to be helpful, to be generous, and to always share what we have, and to give back. And have respect, always respect for Mother Earth and everything on Mother Earth. Because for us, everything has energy and everything is light.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks very much. And will you tell me a little bit more, or can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you grew up and your background? And you were telling me earlier that you moved to work with the Saúke Nation. So how did all that come about?
Well, I've had many jobs over my lifetime. And one of them was a prison guard at the men's prison in William Head, which is not too far from here. So that's the reason I moved to Saúke in the first place. And I loved it here so much. And it's part of the people. They're like my community here. So I stayed here even after I finished work there. Yeah.
So how do you get to become an elder then?
Well, I think just just my own spiritual growth. I did grow up with a lot of elders, and I listened to them as a child, and I was always with the elders when I was young. So I'd observe, I listen, and know what they were talking about. Yeah, that's how I learned, is being there with them.
And if somebody was to say to you that like elders are the wise people in a community, how does that sit with you?
I would say I'm a knowledge keeper, because I know from growing up for many, many years, our teachings, our ways.
Your teachings are, sorry, I missed that last piece.
Our ways,
Right.
our people's ways. Yes.
Okay. You know, I work in a Department of International Development. And what that's about is I'm not saying that this is what we assume, but it's often assumed that this whole kind of thing about development is about a constant progression. Now, this is something that we question, you know, that actually sometimes our whole world is based on overdevelopment or some kind of, you know, maldevelopment. But I'm always intrigued by this idea that people have that somehow we're always improving or getting better. Mm. And when I listen to you talking, I wonder how that idea of getting better or progression sits with this idea of the knowledge coming from the past and from traditions and from elders of the past, and being a knowledge keeper that you are. It seems to me that it goes counter to that idea that things are always getting better. I wonder, have you any thoughts on that?
Well, I did have a thought. What I was thinking of was, you know, a long ago, we use the land. The land is part of us. And we shared the land. We didn't chop up the land to sell it for real estate or anything like that. We all just shared land. If someone needed a place to live, they would come, they would be invited to live there. Like any community members didn't have to sign papers or say, okay, you owe me this much, or it was nothing like that. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, sharing and being generous was a big thing a long time ago. We still try to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so in your community, those values are still held with a lot of, I suppose, held on to. Is that the case?
With some. With some.
Okay. Okay.
Like everything has changed so much with everything else.
Yeah.
But that's the way it was when I was growing up. And I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah. And you were telling me earlier that you teach in a kindergarten and teach children like the language and about how important it is to respect and protect Mother Earth. And yes, those values that you've just kind of talked a little bit about, of sharing, being generous, and that whole thing of respect. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So these are little 4- and 5-year-olds. I had 7 classrooms in a week where I would spend time with the little ones. And at the end of my session with them, I would have a question for them. Usually I try to make it about how to help Mother Earth. Make them aware of things that they can do, that what they think of, and they come up with pretty neat things.
What kind of stuff do they come up with?
Oh, like picking up garbage on the beach, if they see any garbage anywhere, and turning lights off when they don't need a light on, not using so much water, like not wasting water. That was one of the things, like take short showers. Those are some of the things they brought up, and and not be wasteful.
Yeah. And can you were telling me that you work with young climate activists?
Yes.
What do you do with them then?
I'm there with them in their sessions, and if they have any questions, they ask me anything they want. Yeah.
And what do they do?
Well, right now they're how long have they been the climate action?
About 6 months.
6 months? Yeah. They're just finding their way, or getting, they're becoming more involved with groups, talking about, well, 2 of them are from the town that was burnt down this past summer. So they have firsthand experience of horrible situation. Yeah. With no community left.
So is this Lytton?
Yes.
Yeah. And so are the people from Lytton, they were displaced, and I understand a few people died in the fire during the summer.
Yes.
And so they were displaced, and they're still not back in their town.
Yep.
Yeah. So we were talking to someone, Sunshine, at the last First Wednesday, and she expressed the pain and the trauma of that on the community and on people. And we saw, many of us in Ireland saw it on our television, on our news, and on our social media feeds during the summer. And I suppose it brought home, as often do, floods and fires in other countries. It brings home the presence of the destructive nature of climate change and the climate disaster very much. I'm just wondering, when did you become kind of aware of the importance, or of the urgency of protecting the environment first off? Were you always aware of it?
Well, I always knew what our elders were talking about when I was growing up. How to treat everything as energy, that they have life. Even rocks have a life, and you be respectful, and all that. Everything has life.
Yeah, so it's something that you've always kind of brought through your life, I guess, then.
Yeah.
And how do you kind of pass that on to those young climate activists, or do they have that sense, do you think, already themselves?
Well, like I said, every gathering we have, I have a prayer, and I include everything in my prayer, so they hear my prayer, and it helps them stay focused and grounded.
Right. Brilliant. One of the things that I've been reflecting on quite a lot myself over recent times is that, and it's back to the point that you make there, that everything has energy and everything has life. And you say even the rocks, you know, which people, so many of us kind of think of as inanimate, you know, and kind of separate or disconnected from us, or something to use, something that we can use for human purposes. And it has really struck me in recent times, as I reflect more and more on it, about how disconnected people often are from their relationships with other people in the world, from our relationships with the natural world. Like you mentioned it earlier in your prayer, you talked about the four-leggeds and the water creatures, and you had the water dwellers and the sky creatures. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was really beautiful. And so this kind of sense, I suppose, that people are always primary, you know, first, and therefore that has allowed for kind of using the world and using nature and using the environment and using other people. Actually, that whole thing about, you know, seeing ourselves somehow as disconnected from, emotionally and physically and spiritually, from others, but also kind of better. And I'm growing in my sense that is at the heart of a lot of the destruction in the world. That sense that we have of being able to disconnect ourselves from our interdependence and from our relationality. If I don't want to be putting big words on it, but our actual interconnection with other beings and things and structures and peoples. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, you know, whenever we do anything, like even taking bark from a cedar tree, we say a prayer, we thank the tree, and we talk to the creator and say what we are going to use it for. And we ask permission. For anything, we say a prayer if we're going to use something. Like if they have to clear land to build a house. Some people have asked me to come and do a prayer and bless the land and let Mother Earth know what is happening, and, you know, just asking permission and doing it in a good way. Mm-hmm.
It's a very different disposition, isn't it? It's a very different way of engaging with the world, rather than kind of consumption. So it's not about consuming or some kind of a sense that we have this natural right somehow to take, but it challenges that very much by, like you just said it there, like seeking permission and thanking. So it's not a kind of it's much more not taking anything for granted, effectively,
right,
in the way.
Right.
Do you want to? I suppose that whole consumption thing is so much part of our world, and it just seems to kind of be this endless cycle of, you know, we can still take. And I was really struck by that with, for example, the promises that have come out over these last few days from COP. Now, I haven't had time to follow any of the detail, but what I have noticed is that you hear, you know, at this meeting, you hear governments and leaders, they were all standing up yesterday and saying things like, we'll stop cutting trees by 2050. In 30 years' time, basically, we won't have cut any more trees. Or we will stop doing this something by 2070. And it really strikes me that it's a kind of, we will do this in the future, but in the meantime, we'll consume. And that young woman that we're all very familiar with, Greta Thunberg, and others, highlight that actually we're doing more destruction to the environment at the moment than we were 5 years ago and than we were 20 years ago. And I just wonder, like, when is that massive consumption, or kind of, when are we going to stop giving ourselves permission to keep doing that stuff, if you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I wonder, would you like to say anything about that? Or what would you say to the people at COP? What would you say to those global leaders?
Oh, oh my gosh, I was thinking of so much when you were talking. That, you know, it's kind of overwhelming, really,
Yeah.
all the stuff that's happening. It's awful to think that we're doing all that harm. You know, we really have to think of the children. Like, I have a little 2-year-old, I have a 24-year-old grandson and a 2-year-old grandson. And I have to think of them, what their world is going to be like when they're older, when they take our place. And it's not going to be the same. Like, even in the years of my growing up, when I was young, we still had wagons and horses for transportation.
Mm.
There were hardly any vehicles. Yeah. Most of us walked. We walked wherever we had to go. Yeah. So we really have to think about our young and those that, like Chief Gordon Platta said, to the 7th generation. Yeah. Yeah.
And is that 7th generation, does that kind of 7th generation wisdom come into play a lot in the way that you think it as a community and plan? How does that, what does that look like, I suppose?
What do you mean to?
I mean, I suppose, in what ways how do people factor that into what they do in the Sauk Nation?
Well, I think because it is going to affect them to the 7th generation, as we know, I think, you know, that everybody just be mindful. Be mindful and do what you can to help Mother Earth, help us so that we can live.
Yeah. And I mentioned earlier on that the Sauk Nation is a solar powered nation. So it's not, it's basically not reliant on fossil fuels. And is that very obvious in the community? Are people very committed to it, or what's it like?
Yes. I have Andrew. Andrew was the program. He's the one that helped bring the solar to Sauk Nation. As a program director.
Right. So maybe we might hear a little bit more from Andrew about that later on.
Well, he knows all about that.
And are you proud of that, Shirley? What do you think of that?
Oh, yes. You know, that was such a huge thing at the time, because we were the first. Well, Andrew has all that.
Yeah, it was the largest installation in BC, and it's the largest indigenous installation in the world. So many reasons for that too. You know, you say, well, how come it had to be an indigenous community to take the lead? And because in those days it was quite expensive, and but it was having just done the comprehensive planning, it was the thought that we have to do something for the for 100 years time. Just imagine what it's going to be like in 100 years time. And it turned out to be incredibly useful, of course, because one, it saves on bills, you know, that two, we had 12 community members who trained to be solar installers. 3, they all got to work on the project and have gone on to work on other First Nations. But we learned a lot of lessons that, which very few of the lessons have actually got through to COP. I could say it's all about production again. You know, everything's about consuming and producing, whereas it's a fraction of the price to save energy. That's the big thing that we learned, having been the leaders in, you know, in Canada in producing energy. What the biggest lesson was that it's much better to save energy, and that's what everybody can do. Even the children have picked up on that.
Yeah. There.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So it's kind of, there's an awful lot of talk about, you know, green technologies and all of that, and I'm sure lots of them are very helpful. But as you say there, Andrew, there's a lot more to be gained from saving rather than finding new ways to use energy in that way. And when you say it was more expensive back then, that was 2008. Am I right there about that?
Yes,
is that right?
Yeah.
And you know, it always strikes me when we're having conversations like this, and Shirley, when you were talking about the 100 years, and Andrew, you just mentioned the 100 years time there as well. And like I very strongly remember 1992, when there was the first Rio big conference on environment and development, and there was a prior one to that in 1984 that I do not remember. But like, that's now going back 30 years or so. And so we have been talking about, I suppose when I say we, like the world and global leaders have been talking about the need to do something to protect the environment, to ensure that the world survives for future generations for a long time. And it's likely that we will go on talking about this, I guess. And as we go on, the challenges will grow. But I really like that long time frame thinking and planning and reflection, because it's like, if you think about it, it hooks us back 100 years and forward 100 years. So the long process gives one a sense of the importance of the past and the future, and of course the urgency of working in the present. Would you like to say anything more about that, Shirley, before we move on?
No, I think Andrew covered everything.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a million, Andrew, for that. I wanted to kind of, before we come to a close, I wanted to ask you a little bit about where you see, apart from in the solar power, but where do you see the kind of things that are happening that are very life-giving and respectful in the way that's important? What do you see going on that gives you hope around the protection of Mother Earth? Yeah.
Okay. It's the little children.
The
little children that will learn and live, hopefully, the good way of all that I mentioned, what our values are.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I suppose in terms of the kind of the roots of the wisdom for them, what do you think others in your community can harness to support them into the future?
Everybody needs to walk their talk. We hear people talking all the time, but they need to walk the talk. That's doing. That's what I call walk the talk. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And would you, I was going to ask you to give me a couple of examples of what that might look like. if you'd have a few.
Well, just, you know, being respectful in everything you do, being mindful of everything you do, and being thankful. Always need to be thankful and grateful. Yeah.
That's brilliant, Shirley. Thanks very much. I'm just I've kind of come to I think we might have come to a natural close in terms of my kind of areas that I wanted to talk to you about. But I'm just wondering if there are any other questions from any of those who are listening to us. Mark, I know from Kolov, is gathering maybe some questions for us or any comments. So if Mark would like to let me know if there's anything there, because I can't actually see. I can't see it either. Shirley, it's just I can see you on my screen and me, and that's kind of it. So I'm just wondering if there's any questions or anybody like to say anything, please put it up there on YouTube. We'll give you a few minutes to say any more. You were saying to me earlier as well, Shirley, you don't like this Zoom. How have you found our conversation so far this evening?
Oh, it's been wonderful. I kind of forgot to be stressed.
That's good anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's something.
I'd like to know what's on your wall there. Are they?
Oh, very good. Okay, so what I use this room for my teaching. Sometimes I'm at home. And I decided that I would put some pictures on my wall just to brighten it up a little bit. So these are photographs that I've taken myself, or little posters that I gather. So there's a poster up here at the top, which is Broad, which is the Irish word for pride. So the Irish Postal Service sent out these posters back for, I think it was in June, and I got it and I wanted to put it up. That's one thing. That's the colorful one. The other pictures, I took them most of them myself, and actually the graffiti there, if you can see it.
Yeah, I can see.
You can see the graffiti. That was done by my niece. My niece drew that on her house wall, and I thought it was really cool, so I took a photograph of it. And there's something there about Black Lives Matter.
Oh.
There's a couple of pictures that are about kind of homelessness and challenging that. My niece also did the little angel, and then the little picture there with there's a poster, a postcard a friend of mine sent me of our president, who's I'm a big fan of him, and he's dressed up, and it's a funny thing, you can't really see it. And then this poster here I got when I was in Central America back in 1992, and it says let me go over and see exactly what it says. It'll just take a second. It says the environment is also for the lakes, trees, rivers, and animals. And it's from the Environmental Network of Nicaragua. And it's actually a photograph of a poster that I picked up back in 1992. Oh. So I put them up there just to kind of, they're kind of tools. I love images and working with images, and I use them a lot in my kind of engagement with people. And so I think it's nice to have them there. That's what they're.
Oh, it is. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So I don't think there's anybody talking. Oh, there are. So somebody is after saying, I have the messages are coming into my phone here. So I'll just call them out to you if there's, there's lots here. So I'll come back to the question. And then, so from Tom, that idea about sharing land, not owning it individually, but owning it in community is quite interesting. And then suggests that, I wonder, could we apply it to the housing in cities in Ireland? And Jodie said, it was so beautiful to hear you speak, Shirley. I too believe that we have so much to learn from our elders and from your Indigenous ways, and we need to take a step back and breathe. And then somebody has come up with something, which is, how does Shirley see things changing arising from COP, or what is your hope from this COP meeting? If you'd like to respond to any of those. Thanks very much, everyone, for sending in some comments and questions.
Okay, I have to think about that.
What's your hope from it, basically, from this big meeting?
Oh, I guess that everybody, that means all the leaders in the world and the influential people would listen and take action. Yeah, that we start going in the right direction.
Yeah. Great. It's hard to imagine what can happen if we don't. And then I guess really, it's really encouraging to know that there are so many people everywhere in the world who really want this to change and want something real and meaningful, and that it's not return to normal or, you know, ongoing as it has been. And Sandra says, thanks so much, Shirley, for such an inspiring workshop. We have so much to learn. So lots of people very grateful and listening, I think, very much. And it's, yeah, so it's really a privilege to be able to talk to you about all of these things, Shirley. And thanks for sharing your wisdom. One of the things that really strikes me is that you say it. And when you say it, you mean it. And it's not about repeating necessarily or kind of talking around stuff. It's just do it, basically. And that's really refreshing as well, because the words say it, the words, and as you said earlier on, deeds say it all. And how you are in your presence and how you are in your communication says it all. And I loved this, and I've written it down, and I will try and keep hold of what you've said in terms of, may we walk with kind, gentle steps every day on this earth. And that's so, you know, so valuable. If we carried that with us, that would be amazing. Very few of us would do too much damage if we did that. And if we were thankful, and, you know, if we sought permission for our use of the world and the environment. So I'll just see if there's anybody else, and if there isn't, we'll wrap up. I think that's it, really. And I'd just like to say thanks so much, Shirley. It's been just beautiful talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
And I'd like to wish you all the very best with your work with the youth activists, and I'd like to if I'd be grateful if you could pass on my best to Sunshine and to others in the Lytton community. And I know Colov will be keeping up its contacts with Videa, and, you know, it's really good to have this kind of a connection between these organizations, and it's it's just lovely to be able to connect and to talk.
Yeah, Hillary told me that they'll be listening to this today, so they've heard you. Great.
So is there anything else that you'd like to say? Are you happy enough to wrap up at this point?
Is there somebody else?
No, I don't think so. I think we're
okay. No, I just want to say Haichka. That's how we say thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.